She was just a maid. No one listened to her. No one believed her. But when a 3-year-old girl was suffocating and there was no help, she stole a billionaire's Rolls-Royce and took her to the hospital. She was arrested for this. But the truth that the doctors discovered shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you're from. Alicia stood at the gates of the mansion as though the sheer size of it might swallow her whole. The pillars rose like silent guards, pale and cold against the morning sky, and the glass walls shimmered with a reflection of everything she had never had. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, a place built to keep the world outside as much as it was built to hold power within. She adjusted the strap of the worn bag on her shoulder and touched the thin fabric of her uniform folded inside. The only thing she had been given to mark her place here. She felt like an intruder even though she had been hired. The word maid had weight, and in this house it meant invisibility. She had never been inside a world like this. Her life until now had been one of cramped apartments, thin mattresses, and jobs that came and went without stability. Since she was a teenager, she had scrubbed floors in small diners, washed clothes in laundromats for extra cash, and cleaned offices at night when the workers had gone home. Her hands carried the evidence, with cracked knuckles and lines too deep for someone her age. She remembered her little brother, younger by nearly 10 years, with his wide eyes and fragile chest that never seemed to fill with air properly. She remembered sitting with him through nights of fever, whispering stories she made up on the spot, and then remembered the day the ambulance came too late. That memory never left her, not when she walked, not when she slept, and certainly not now as she stepped into a place where everything gleamed with the kind of money that could have saved him. Inside, silence swallowed her. The marble floors stretched endlessly, their pale surface reflecting every movement. The air smelled faintly of polish and expensive flowers, carefully arranged in tall glass vases that no one dared to touch. Staff moved about like shadows, heads lowered, steps soft, eyes downcast. They did not greet her. They did not ask her name. One older maid handed her a folded uniform and pointed down a narrow corridor without more than a nod. Alicia followed, the soles of her shoes making sounds that seemed too loud in this place. The room she was given was little more than a box at the far end of a long hallway. A narrow bed, a small dresser, a single lamp. The window faced a wall instead of the view of the hills. It reminded her of the kind of cheap motel room people used only when they had nowhere else to go. Still, it was more than she had yesterday, and she told herself not to complain. She was here to work, to be invisible, to survive. She learned quickly how the house worked. Every corner had cameras, every door had sensors, and the garage was treated like a shrine. She caught glimpses of it when she carried laundry past the side windows. Gleaming cars lined in rows, the kind of vehicles she had only ever seen in magazines left behind in waiting rooms. Ferraris, Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce, polished until it seemed to glow in its own light. They were worth more than she could ever imagine holding in her hands. They were worth more than her entire neighborhood back home. The owner of all this was a man named Richard. She had not spoken to him, had not even seen him up close. She knew him only as a presence, a set of footsteps sometimes heard in the upstairs halls, a deep voice issuing orders through others. His life stretched across borders, his wealth scattered in businesses she could barely pronounce. For him, emotions were unnecessary. What mattered was control. The staff said he was cold, but Alicia thought he was simply distant, living in a world where people were little more than roles to be filled. The first time Alicia saw the child, it was by accident. She had been carrying a tray of folded towels down the upstairs corridor when she heard a faint sound, like a soft cough or whimper. She hesitated and peered into the open door. There, in a room filled with pale light from tall windows, sat a little girl no more than 3 years old. She was thin, fragile, her skin almost translucent against the oversized sweater she wore. She clutched a stuffed toy in her arms, holding it so tightly it seemed a part of her. The toy's fur was worn, one button eye hanging by a thread, but it was clearly her anchor. The girl did not look up when Alicia entered. She did not smile, did not frown, did not do what children usually did when they saw a stranger. She simply sat there, breathing shallowly, her small chest rising and falling with visible effort. Alicia placed the towels quietly, afraid that even sound might disturb her. She expected a nurse or a nanny to appear, but none came. After a moment, she whispered, "Hello," though she had been told not to speak unnecessarily. The girl's lips moved, barely forming words. "It hurts." The whisper was so soft Alicia almost thought she imagined it, but she felt something inside her twist and break. She remembered nights with her brother when he had said the same thing, when his voice had been fragile and weak. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scoop the girl up, to tell her she would be all right, but she froze. She was just a maid, new and unnoticed, and she was not supposed to do more than her job. Downstairs, life carried on without interruption. Two older maids folded towels by the laundry chute, whispering to each other as though no one else could hear. "I give her a week," one said, smoothing a sheet. "She's too soft for this place." The other chuckled. "She's seen struggle. That doesn't last here. This house chews it up." They laughed quietly, their voices bouncing off the tiled walls. Alicia passed by silently, her arms filled with pillowcases, but every word pierced her. They were talking about her. She kept moving, her face blank, but her heart beating faster. They thought she would not last. They thought she was weak. They did not know that weakness was the only thing she had ever been allowed to carry, and she had learned to wear it like armor. That evening, the house glowed with golden light, chandeliers flickering across the glass walls. Richard returned from one of his trips, his suit jacket slung over his arm, his face carved into an expression that betrayed nothing. The child did not come down to greet him. He did not expect her to. He passed by staff as though they were furniture, eyes fixed on his phone, his mind somewhere else. Alicia dusted the upstairs study, her hands careful over the polished wood. At the far end of the hallway stood a locked door, Richard's private office. She had cleaned near it enough times to notice the blinking red sensors above the frame, the keyhole that most people overlooked. It was off limits. She was not supposed to wonder, and yet she did. She felt, even then, that time in this house ticked differently, that something waited behind every closed door. The night passed in silence, but for Alicia, silence was not peace. It was waiting. And though she did not know it yet, every step she took inside this mansion was leading her toward a moment where rules, wealth, and fear would mean nothing compared to a child's fragile breath. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of morning that seemed to pull its weight into every corner of the house. Clouds hung low across the hills, muting even the brilliant shine of the mansion's glass walls. The light inside felt dimmer than usual, though every chandelier and lamp had been lit. Alicia rose early, as she always did, tying her shoes so tightly the laces dug into her ankles. Her uniform freshly pressed, though her hands still carried the lines of work that no uniform could cover. She tried to ignore the restless sleep of the night before, the way she kept hearing that tiny whisper from the girl upstairs. "It hurts," echoing inside her skull. The day in the house began as though nothing in the world had shifted. Staff walked the corridors with polished trays, polished shoes, polished words that said nothing and meant less. The head maid scolded another about detergent arriving in the wrong shipment. The chef complained about a missing ingredient in the pantry, and the gardeners prepared the patio for a dinner that would not take place for another week. It was a world obsessed with surfaces, and beneath those surfaces, nothing stirred. No one spoke of the child. No one even asked if she had woken yet. Alicia noticed this absence like a ringing bell, louder than all the murmurs of routine. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, the breakfast tray trembling slightly in her grip. Her eyes lingered down the long hallway to the little room where the girl spent most of her days. She felt that same tug inside her chest as before, that invisible cord pulling her forward. She stood outside the door and knocked once, then again, a little harder. Silence answered. Her hand turned the knob slowly, and the door creaked open. The sight inside froze her where she stood. The child lay halfway off the bed, her small body twisted, her head damp with sweat that plastered strands of hair against her forehead. Her lips were dry and pale, her little hands shaking as though she were fighting some invisible battle inside her own blood. The stuffed toy lay inches from her fingers, abandoned as if even that small comfort had slipped away. The smell in the room was sharp and wrong, a mixture of plastic, medicine, and fear. Alicia dropped to her knees beside her. "Selena," she whispered, though the child's eyes fluttered without recognition. Her breath came ragged, shallow, like she was inhaling broken glass. Panic rose like a tide inside Alicia, but her body moved faster than her fear. She leapt to the wall and pressed the emergency call button. Nothing happened. She grabbed the phone on the nightstand, dialed the nurse's number listed on the sheet pinned to the board. Straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Still nothing. She slammed the receiver down, her fingers shaking, and ran to the hallway. The others were gathered near the pantry, laughing about something trivial, their voices loud and careless. Alicia burst in, her face pale, her breath quick. "She's not breathing right. The child, she needs help now." They barely turned. One waved her off. "We don't go upstairs without clearance." Another adjusted her apron and muttered, "We'll inform the estate manager. That's the process." Process. The word echoed in her ears like a curse. Alicia felt her fists curl, her teeth clench. Every second dragged the girl closer to the same silence her brother had slipped into. She didn't have time to argue with women who lived by rules that meant nothing to a child gasping for air. She turned and ran back up the stairs, two at a time, heart pounding. Selena was worse now. Her chest rose too fast, too shallow. Her eyes rolled back slightly, her tiny body curling in on itself as if trying to protect what little strength she had left. Alicia stood there for a split second, her breath ragged, before her gaze darted down the hall to the far door. The locked office. She had never been inside, but she had cleaned near it enough to notice details others ignored. The small keyhole above the knob. The red tag on the basement wall where the key always hung. The one marked "Do Not Remove." After one, her decision came not from thought but from instinct. She sprinted downstairs, her shoes slapping against the marble, her hands searching frantically along the wall until they closed around the key. She yanked it free and ran back up, barely aware of whether anyone saw her. Her chest burned as she slid the key into the lock and twisted. The door opened with a quiet click, and the silence inside nearly deafened her. The office was a cathedral of wealth. Leather chairs, shelves lined with awards, glass cases gleaming with tokens of power. A wall safe loomed, and on the polished desk sat the things she needed most. A black key fob with the crest of the Rolls-Royce, and beside it, a thick bundle of $100 bills. She hesitated only a moment, the weight of rules pressing against her ribs, and then she scooped both into her hands. She rushed back to the bedroom, gathered the child in her arms. Selena was light as glass, yet Alicia's arms trembled with the effort of holding her, because she was holding more than a body. She was holding time, slipping too fast. She carried her down the halls, ignoring the blinking cameras, ignoring the alarms that had begun to hum as the sensors picked up the breach. She burst through the front door into the open air, her lungs filling with it like fire. The garage door recognized the fob instantly. The Rolls-Royce came to life with a soft hum, lights flashing. Alicia placed Selena gently across the passenger seat, buckled the belt over her tiny chest, tucked the stuffed toy against her fingers. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just hold on." Then she slammed the door and slid behind the wheel. The car purred beneath her like an animal waiting to leap. Her hands clenched the wheel, her foot pressed the accelerator, and the mansion shrank in the rearview mirror as tires squealed against the pavement. She didn't look back, though behind her, alarms blared louder, and on the screens inside, security guards shouted over radios. Unauthorized access, office breach, vehicle missing. On the road, Alicia's breath came in gasps, her heart pounding louder than the roar of the engine. Traffic blurred around her, horns screamed, and yet all she saw was the small head of the child leaned back, her skin too gray, her lips trembling with each shallow breath. The GPS blinked directions on the dashboard, but she ignored it. She knew the way. She knew the hospital with the best emergency care. Not the closest. The best. She whispered the words again and again like a prayer. "Hold on, please, hold on." Far behind her, two black SUVs pulled out of the mansion's gates, their engines growling, their headlights cutting through the storm-dark morning. They had her location already. They had the means to catch her. But Alicia didn't know and wouldn't have cared if she did. All she could see was the fragile thread of breath in the child beside her, and all she could hear was the echo of her brother's voice from years ago, saying it hurt, and the silence that had followed when help came too late. She would not let silence win again. Time had stopped. It was no longer measured in hours or minutes, but in heartbeats, in gasps, in the distance between one breath and the next. And Alicia drove into that stop time, defying every rule, every barrier, every voice that had told her she was invisible. The mansion, the alarms, the wealth, the fear, they all blurred behind her. What mattered was the child. What mattered was life, and she would risk everything for it. The Rolls-Royce tore down the winding road that led from the mansion's gates, its engine a low growl beneath Alicia's hands. She had never driven anything more powerful than an old sedan borrowed from a neighbor years ago, and now the luxury machine seemed almost alive, a beast she barely knew how to control. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the wheel, her foot heavy on the accelerator, though her heart begged her to go faster. Every glance at the child beside her was another knife. Selena's small head lolled against the seatbelt, her lips tinged with blue, her breaths shallow and uneven. The stuffed toy cradled weakly in her fingers. Each second she looked more fragile, more distant, and Alicia's own breath quickened to match the frantic beat of her heart. Behind her, the world she had just left did not remain still. The moment the car breached the sensors, alarms wailed through the estate. On the security screens, red boxes flashed around her figure as cameras captured her sprinting across marble floors with the child in her arms. Voices shouted into radios, feet pounded down the hallways, and within minutes the heavy black SUVs roared to life in the underground garage. Engines thundered, headlights flared, and the chase began. On the road, Alicia felt them before she saw them. A glance in the rearview mirror caught the gleam of dark vehicles sweeping out from behind the hills, their silhouettes predatory against the pale sky. They were closing in fast, swallowing the distance between them. Panic twisted inside her, but she forced herself to stay steady. She pressed the accelerator harder, the car leaping forward as if sensing her desperation. The city stretched ahead, its skyline a haze against the low clouds. The streets were already stirring with traffic, delivery vans, early commuters, buses lumbering along their routes. Alicia wove between them with a recklessness that came not from courage but necessity. Horns blared, brakes screeched, drivers shouted through rolled-down windows, but she barely heard them. Her ears were filled only with the sound of her own heartbeat and the fragile rasp of Selena's breathing. She whispered to her again and again, though she doubted the child could hear her now. "Hold on, baby, just a little longer, please." In the SUVs, security officers barked orders, their radios crackling with instructions from the mansion. "She's heading east. Block the intersection at 5th. Don't let her out of sight." To them, this was not a rescue. It was a breach, a theft, a crime. The official line already formed itself in their language. A maid had stolen the billionaire's prize car and taken his daughter. The words twisted the truth into something monstrous. But no one inside those vehicles cared. They had their orders, and orders were law. Alicia's arms ached from holding the wheel so tight, but she dared not loosen her grip. Every turn of the road was a test, every red light another moment where she had to choose between law and life. More than once she blew through an intersection, the Rolls-Royce jolting as she barely avoided collisions, horns erupting like gunfire around her. She muttered prayers under her breath, not the soft bedtime prayers she had whispered with her brother years ago, but frantic pleas torn from the core of her soul. She did not know who she prayed to. She only knew she needed one more minute, one more mile, one more breath for the little girl beside her. Selena whimpered once, barely audible, a sound so thin it nearly broke Alicia in half. She reached across with one trembling hand and brushed the child's damp hair back, steering with the other. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I won't let go." The car drifted slightly and she snapped her eyes back to the road, forcing her focus even as her heart threatened to split. The hospital loomed ahead, its sterile white lights glowing like a beacon against the dark morning. Relief surged through her, a rush so strong it left her dizzy. She swerved into the emergency lane, tires screeching against the pavement. the heavy car jerking as she braked hard. Doors flew open. She unbuckled Selena with hands that shook so badly she fumbled the clasp twice before it gave way. She scooped the child into her arms, so light she felt like carrying a shadow, and bolted toward the sliding glass doors of the emergency ward. "Help!" Alicia's voice cracked as she shouted, staggering into the blinding brightness of the lobby. Nurses looked up, startled, then rushed forward, a gurney wheeling across the polished floor. "She can't breathe. She has sickle cell, please." The words tumbled from her mouth, half choked with tears she had no time to shed. Hands reached for the child, professional, urgent, lifting her from Alicia's arms and laying her on the gurney. Machines beeped, voices barked medical terms Alicia did not understand, and the small figure of the child disappeared behind swinging doors. The silence that followed was crushing. Alicia stood in the center of the lobby, her chest heaving, her arms empty. The reality of what she had just done began to crash over her like a wave. She had broken into a locked office. She had stolen money. She had taken a car worth more than everything she had ever known. She had fled under alarms, sped through red lights, endangered herself and others. And now she was alone, with no child in her arms, no one to explain her choices. She was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to matter. The sound of tires screeching outside tore her from her spiraling thoughts. The glass doors hissed open, and black SUVs skidded to a stop at the entrance. Men in navy jackets poured out, radios clipped to their shoulders, faces grim and set. Their eyes scanned the lobby until one of them pointed. "That's her." Alicia turned slowly, her arms limp at her sides. For a fleeting second she thought of running, but her legs would not move. She did not flinch when they surrounded her, did not cry out when the cuffs bit into her wrists. She only lifted her chin slightly, her eyes glassy but unafraid. She had done what she had to do. No one could take that from her. A nurse near the door shouted in protest. "What are you doing? She brought in a patient." "She stole a vehicle and cash," one of the guards replied coldly. "She's under arrest." The words rolled through the air, heavy and final. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, letting them wash over her. She had known this was coming from the moment she touched that key. But behind her, through the closed doors of the emergency ward, she thought she heard a child's voice, faint, muffled, but alive. That was enough. Minutes later, the lobby shifted again. A tall figure entered, his gray suit rumpled from travel, his sleeves rolled up, his face unreadable. Richard walked in with the weight of a man who carried both wealth and silence as shields. He did not look at Alicia at first. He moved past her toward the guards, listening as they reported. "She's in holding. Local police are en route. We recovered the vehicle, still counting the cash." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He only glanced toward the hallway where doctors moved swiftly, their voices urgent. One stepped out, a man with lines on his face that spoke of years in the profession. He looked at Richard squarely. "Are you the father?" Richard gave a brief nod. The doctor exhaled sharply. "Your daughter has sickle cell. When a crisis hits, minutes matter. Seconds matter. If that woman hadn't brought her here when she did..." He paused, the weight of the next words heavy. "She would have died." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the air. Richard blinked once, then again, but his face betrayed nothing. The doctor did not wait for an answer. "Your phones were off. Your staff unreachable. Your protocols too slow. That woman saved her, not you, not your systems. Her." And with that, the doctor turned and walked away, leaving the silence to deepen. In a small, cold room down the hall, Alicia sat with her wrists still bound, the sweat on her neck drying, her shoulders tense. She did not weep. She did not beg. She stared at the wall, her breath slow, her thoughts circling only the image of the little girl's chest rising and falling again. The door opened, and she turned. Richard stood there alone. No guards, no lawyers. He looked at her for the first time, not at her uniform, not at her status, but at her. She met his gaze, her eyes rimmed red, but steady. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small silver key, and unlocked her cuffs. The sound of metal falling away was almost deafening. "Come with me," he said quietly. She did not move until he added, "She's asking for you." The hallway outside the holding room was dim, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above the sterile walls. Alicia rose slowly from the chair when Richard stepped aside and gestured for her to follow. Her wrists ached where the cuffs had pressed into her skin, faint red marks circling them like reminders of how close she had come to losing not just freedom, but dignity. She walked quietly behind him, her footsteps uncertain. The air in the hospital heavy with the scent of antiseptic and something else she could not name, something sharp and sorrowful. She expected more guards, expected another set of doors to slam shut, but there was only silence as Richard led her down the hall. The world seemed to narrow as they reached the room marked 214. Richard pushed the door open, and the sight inside made Alicia catch her breath. Selena lay small and fragile against a mountain of pale blue blankets, her chest rising more steadily now, an IV trailing into her tiny arm. Monitors beeped softly in rhythm with her heartbeat, and her eyelids fluttered at the sound of the door. For a moment she seemed lost in a dream. Then her eyes opened, weak but aware, and when they found Alicia, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Tasha," she whispered, her voice little more than a breath. The single word sliced through the quiet, fragile but filled with meaning. Alicia stepped forward, drawn by it, until she stood beside the bed. She took the girl's hand carefully, feeling the frail fingers curl around her own. For a second the world disappeared, the hospital lights dimming, the hum of machines fading. There was only the warmth of that small hand and the knowledge that she had carried her this far. Richard stood back, his figure tall and distant near the window. He watched them, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. For years he had surrounded himself with systems and walls, convinced that safety and order could be purchased, enforced, controlled. But now, staring at his daughter clinging to the hand of a woman he had never trusted, he felt the hollowness of that belief settle heavy on his chest. Night fell quietly, painting the city beyond the window with pink, and then with the scattered glow of lights flickering awake. Alicia remained by the child's side, her hand never leaving Selena's, her posture a mixture of exhaustion and vigilance. Richard finally turned and left the room, his steps measured, but something in his shoulders weighed lower than before. By morning, the story had already begun to spread. Whispers twisted into rumors. Rumors grew into headlines. Black Maid arrested for kidnapping billionaire's daughter. Rolls-Royce stolen in dramatic chase. Quoi? Child's life at risk in attempted abduction. The world did not wait for truth. It fed on the spectacle. Commentators speculated, voices sharpened, assumptions piled like stones against Alicia's name. She remained in the hospital, still uncertain what awaited her beyond those doors, but her focus never wavered from the little girl who squeezed her hand when she had the strength. What no one expected came later that day. Richard's office released a short statement to the press. He would be making a public address that evening, live from the estate. His staff were startled, unprepared, scrambling to piece together what he might say. The mansion's gates were soon crowded with cameras, microphones, reporters pressing against the iron bars like spectators waiting for a show. That evening, the gates opened. Richard stepped out onto the broad lawn, where a podium had been placed beneath the glow of floodlights. The murmurs of the crowd grew, cameras clicked in rapid fire. But the real shock was the woman who stood beside him. Alicia was no longer in a uniform, but in a modest gray dress someone had hastily pressed for her. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her shoulders squared, though her hands trembled slightly where they clasped together. She looked out at the sea of flashing bulbs with wide eyes, her heart pounding, yet she remained still. Richard's voice broke the silence. He spoke without notes, without the polished veneer of a businessman rehearsing lines. "Last night, my daughter nearly died," he began, his words slow and steady, echoing over the lawn. "And the only reason she is alive today is because of the woman standing beside me." He paused, letting the weight of that truth fall. Yes, she broke rules, but sometimes rules are the problem. No one else acted. No one else ran. No one else cared the way she did. Alicia did what I could not, and the world should know her name. The murmurs swelled, reporters leaning forward, pens scratching furiously, shutters exploding with light. Alicia felt her breath catch, her chest tightening as though the words were not meant for her, could not possibly be about her. But Richard was not finished. Effective immediately, he continued, Alicia will not only remain in my household, she will never again work as a maid. I have created a trust in her name, and she will oversee our family's medical outreach foundation going forward. The crowd erupted into noise, questions shouted, cameras snapping even faster. Alicia turned to him, stunned, her lips parted, but no words came. She had prepared herself for punishment, for shame, for the weight of labels she could not shake. Instead, she stood in the center of a storm, with her name spoken not as accusation, but as honor. Richard's voice steadied as he finished. If we are to build systems that protect children like my daughter, then they must be led by people who act, not just people who speak. Inside the mansion that night, the whispers were no longer cruel. Staff exchanged glances in hallways, voices hushed but tinged with disbelief. She's staying, one muttered behind a curtain. More than staying, another replied. She's running things now. Alicia heard them as she passed, but this time she did not lower her gaze or quicken her steps. She walked with a new weight in her stride, not of fear, but of certainty. For the first time in her life, she was not treading on eggshells. She was walking her own ground. Selena's recovery was slow, but each week brought new strength. The girl's laughter, once rare and brittle, now echoed through the same halls that had long swallowed silence. And every time she smiled at Alicia, it was like a promise, a bond sealed in the fire of crisis and carried into a future neither of them had expected. They had once called her just a maid. They had once dismissed her as invisible, unimportant, replaceable. But now she was the woman who had rewritten the rules, the woman who had held life in her arms and refused to let it slip away. And the man who once had not seen her was now the first to stand beside her when the world finally did. Alicia understood then that sometimes the people overlooked, the ones ignored and underestimated, were the very people who rose when it mattered most. She had not waited for permission. She had not asked for recognition. She had acted, and in doing so, she had saved a child and changed the course of her own life. Her name, once spoken only in shadows, now carried through headlines and conversations. And when she heard Selena whisper it again, softly with trust and love in her voice, Alicia knew she had found not just a place in the world, but a purpose. She was no longer invisible. She was the reason a little girl had a second chance at life, and that was worth more than any fortune, any car, or any rule she had broken along the way. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Watch our upcoming videos for more powerful stories, and explore the ones already on the channel for journeys that stay with you. And please share this video with your friends and family, because some stories are too important to keep to yourself.